Part 1. Books I, 3. Book 1. The Book of Beginnings. Canto 1. The Symbol Dawn. It was the hour before the gods awake. Across the path of the divine event the huge foreboding mind of night, alone in her unlit temple of eternity, lay stretched immobile upon silence marge. Almost one felt, opaque, impenetrable, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse the abysm of the unbodied infinite, a fathomless zero occupied the world. A power of fallen boundless self awake between the first and the last nothingness, recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came, turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. As in a dark beginning of all things, a mute featureless semblance of the unknown repeating forever the unconscious act, prolonging forever the unseeing will, cradled the cosmic drowse of ignorant force whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns and carries our lives in its somnambulist whirl. Athwart the vain enormous trance of space, its formless stupor without mind or life, a shadow spinning through a soulless void, thrown back once more into unthinking dreams, earth-wheeled abandoned in the hollow gulfs forgetful of her spirit and her fate. The impassive skies were neutral, empty, still. Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred, a nameless movement, an unthought idea insistent, dissatisfied, without an aim, something that wished but knew not how to be, teased the inconscient to wake ignorance. A throe that came and left a quivering trace, gave room for an old tired want unfilled, at peace in its subconscient moonless cave to raise its head and look for absent light, straining closed eyes of vanished memory, like one who searches for a bygone self and only meets the corpse of his desire. It was as though even in this naught's profound, even in this ultimate dissolution's core, there lurked an unremembering entity, survivor of a slain and buried past condemned to resume the effort and the pang, reviving in another frustrate world. An unshaped consciousness desired light and a blank prescience yearned towards distant change. As if a childlike finger laid on a cheek reminded of the endless need in things the heedless mother of the universe, an infant longing clutched the somber vast. Insensibly somewhere a breach began, a long lone line of hesitating hue like a vague smile tempting a desert heart troubled the far rim of life's obscure sleep. Arrived from the other side of boundlessness an eye of deity peered through the dumb deeps, a scout in a reconnaissance from the sun, it seemed amid a heavy cosmic rest, the torpor of a sick and weary world, to seek for a spirit soul and desolate too fallen to recollect forgotten bliss. Intervening in a mindless universe, its message crept through the reluctant hush calling the adventure of consciousness and joy and, conquering nature's disillusioned breast, compelled renewed consent to see and feel. A thought was sown in the unsounded void, a sense was born within the darkness depths, a memory quivered in the heart of time as if a soul long dead were moved to live, but the oblivion that succeeds the fall, had blotted the crowded tablets of the past, and all that was destroyed must be rebuilt an old experience labored out once more. All can be done if the God touch is there. A hope stole in that hardly dared to be amid the night's forlorn indifference. As if solicited in an alien world with timid and hazardous instinctive grace, orphaned and driven out to seek a home, an errant marvel with no place to live, into a far-off nook of heaven there came a slow miraculous gesture's dim appeal. The persistent thrill of a transfiguring touch persuaded the inert black quietude and beauty and wonder disturbed the fields of God. A wandering hand of pale enchanted light that glowed along a fading moment's brink, fixed with gold panel and opalescent hinge a gate of dreams ajar on mystery's verge. One lucent corner windowing hidden things forced the world's blind immensity to sight. The darkness failed and slipped like a falling cloak from the reclining body of a god. Then through the pallid rift that seemed at first hardly enough for a trickle from the suns, outpoured the revelation and the flame. The brief perpetual sign recurred above. A glamour from unreached transcendences iridescent with the glory of the unseen, a message from the unknown immortal light ablaze upon creation's quivering edge, dawn built her aura of magnificent hues and buried its seed of grandeur in the hours. An instant's visitor the Godhead shone. On life's thin border awhile the vision stood and bent over earth's pondering forehead curve. Interpreting a recondite beauty and bliss in colors, hieroglyphs of mystic sense, it wrote the lines of a significant myth telling of a greatness of spiritual dawns, a brilliant code penned with the sky for page. Almost that day the epiphany was disclosed of which our thoughts and hopes are signal flares, a lonely splendor from the invisible goal almost was flung on the opaque inane. Once more a tread perturbed the vacant vasts, infinity's center, a face of rapturous calm parted the eternal lids that open heaven, a form from far beatitudes seemed to near. Ambassadress twixt eternity and change, the omniscient goddess leaned across the breadths that wrap the fated journeyings of the stars and saw the spaces ready for her feet. Once she half looked behind for her veiled son, then, thoughtful, went to her immortal work. Earth felt the imperishable's passage close, the waking ear of nature heard her steps and wideness turned to her its limitless eye, and, scattered on sealed depths, her luminous smile kindled to fire the silence of the worlds. All grew a consecration and a rite. Air was a vibrant link between earth and heaven, the wide, winged hymn of a great priestly wind arose and failed upon the altar hills, here where our half-lit ignorance skirts the gulfs on the dumb bosom of the ambiguous earth, here where one knows not even the step in front and truth has her throne on the shadowy back of doubt, on this anguished and precarious field of toil outspread beneath some large indifferent gaze, impartial witness of our joy and bale, our prostrate soil bore the awakening ray. Here too the vision and prophetic gleam lit into miracles common meaningless shapes, then the divine afflatus, spent, withdrew, unwanted, fading from the mortal's range. A sacred yearning lingered in its trace, the worship of a presence and a power too perfect to be held by death-bound hearts, the prescience of a marvelous birth to come. Only a little the God-light can stay, spiritual beauty illumining human sight lines with its passion and mystery matters mask and squanders eternity on a beat of time. As when a soul draws near the sill of birth, adjoining mortal time to timelessness, a spark of deity lost in matter's crypt its luster vanishes in the inconscient plains, that transitory glow of magic fire so now dissolved in bright accustomed air. The message ceased and waned the messenger. The single call, the uncompanioned power, drew back into some far-off secret world the hue and marvel of the supernal beam, she looked no more on our mortality. The excess of beauty natural to God, kind could not uphold its claim on time-born eyes, too mystic, real for space, tenancy there was the common light of earthly day. Affranchised from the respite of fatigue once more the rumor of the speed of life pursued the cycles of her blinded quest. All sprang to their unvarying daily acts, the thousand peoples of the soil and tree obeyed the unforeseeing instant's urge, and, leader here with his uncertain mind, alone who stares at the future's covered face, man lifted up the burden of his fate. And Savitri too awoke among these tribes that hastened to join the brilliant summoner's chant and, lured by the beauty of the apparent ways, acclaimed their portion of ephemeral joy. Akin to the eternity whence she came, no part she took in this small happiness, a mighty stranger in the human field, the embodied guest within made no response. The call that wakes the leap of human mind, its checkered eager motion of pursuit, its fluttering, hued illusion of desire, visited her heart like a sweet alien note. Time's message of brief light was not for her. In her there was the anguish of the gods imprisoned in our transient human mold, the deathless conquered by the death of things. A vaster nature's joy had once been hers, but long could keep not its gold heavenly hue or stand upon this brittle earthly base. A narrow movement on time's deep abysm, life's fragile littleness denied the power, the proud and conscious wideness and the bliss she had brought with her into the human form, the calm delight that weds one soul to all, the key to the flaming doors of ecstasy. Earth's grain that needs the sap of pleasure and tears rejected the undying rapture's boon, offered to the daughter of infinity her passion, flower of love and doom she gave. In vain now seemed the splendid sacrifice. A prodigal of her rich divinity, herself and all she was she had lent to men, hoping her greater being to implant and in their bodies' lives acclimatize that heaven might native grow on mortal soil. Hard is it to persuade earth, nature's change, Mortality bears ill the Eternal's touch, it fears the pure divine intolerance of that assault of ether and of fire, it murmurs at its sorrowless happiness, almost with hate repels the light it brings, it trembles at its naked power of truth and the might and sweetness of its absolute voice. Inflicting on the heights the abysm's law, it sullies with its mire heaven's messengers, its thorns of fallen nature are the defense it turns against the Saviour hands of grace, it meets the sons of God with death and pain. A glory of lightnings traversing the earth seen, their sun, thoughts fading, darkened by ignorant minds, their work betrayed, their good to evil turned, the cross their payment for the crown they gave, only they leave behind a splendid name. A fire has come and touched men's hearts and gone, a few have caught flame and risen to greater life. Too unlike the world she came to help and save, her greatness weighed upon its ignorant breast and from its dim chasms welled Athos trapped in the gin of earthly destinies, awaiting her ordeals our abode, outcast from her inborn felicity, accepting life's obscure terrestrial robe, hiding herself even from those she loved, the Godhead greater by a human fate. A dark foreknowledge separated her from all of whom she was the star and stay, too great to impart the peril and the pain, in her torn depths she kept the grief to come. As one who watching over men left blind takes up the load of an unwitting race, harboring a foe whom with her heart she must feed, unknown her act, unknown the doom she faced, unhelped she must foresee and dread and dare. The long, foreknown and fatal morn was here bringing a noon that seemed like every noon. For nature walks upon her mighty way unheeding when she breaks a soul, a life, leaving her slain behind she travels on, man only marks and God's all-seeing eyes. Even in this moment of her soul's despair, in its grim rendezvous with death and fear, no cry broke from her lips, no call for aid, she told the secret of her woe to none, calm was her face and courage kept her mute. Yet only her outward self suffered and strove, even her humanity was half divine, her spirit open to the spirit in all, her nature felt all nature as its own. Apart, living within, all lives she bore, aloof, she carried in herself the world, her dread was one with the great cosmic dread, her strength was founded on the cosmic mights, the universal mother's love was hers. Against the evil at life's afflicted roots, her own calamity its private sign, of her pangs she made a mystic poignant sword. A solitary mind, a world-wide heart, to the lone immortal's unshared work she rose. At first life grieved not in her burdened breast, on the lap of earth's original somnolence inert, released into forgetfulness, prone it reposed, unconscious on mind's verge, obtuse and tranquil like the stone and star. In a deep cleft of silence twixt two realms she lay remote from grief, unsorn by care, nothing recalling of the sorrow here. Then a slow faint remembrance shadow-like moved, and sighing she laid her hand upon her bosom and recognized the close and lingering ache, deep, quiet, old, made natural to its place, but knew not why it was there nor whence it came. The power that kindles mind was still withdrawn, heavy, unwilling were life's servitors like workers with no wages of delight, sullen, the torch of sense refused to burn, the unassisted brain found not its past. Only a vague earth, nature held the frame. But now she stirred, her life shared the cosmic load. At the summons of her body's voiceless call her strong far-winging spirit traveled back to the yoke of ignorance and fate, back to the labor and stress of mortal days, lighting a pathway through strange symbol dreams across the ebbing of the seas of sleep. Her house of nature felt an unseen sway, illumined swiftly were life's darkened rooms, and memory's casements opened on the hours and the tired feet of thought approached her doors. All came back like giant figures wrestling in the night, the godheads from the dim inconscient born awoke to struggle and the pang divine, and in the shadow of her flaming heart, at the somber center of the dire debate, a guardian of the unconsoled abyss inheriting the long agony of the globe, a stone, still figure of high and godlike pain stared into space with fixed regardless eyes that saw grief's timeless depths but not life's goal. Afflicted by his harsh divinity, bound to his throne, he waited unappeased the daily oblation of her unwept tears. All the fierce question of man's hours relived. The sacrifice of suffering and desire earth offers to the immortal ecstasy began again beneath the eternal hand. Awake she endured the moment's serried march and looked on this green smiling dangerous world, and heard the ignorant cry of living things. Amid the trivial sounds, the unchanging scene her soul arose confronting time and fate. Immobile in herself, she gathered force. This was the day when Suchavan must die. Canto 2. The issue. A while, withdrawn in secret fields of thought, her mind moved in a many-imaged past that lived again and saw its end approach. Dying, it lived imperishably in her, transient and vanishing from transient eyes, invisible, a fateful ghost of self, it bore the future on its phantom breast. Along the fleeting events far backward trail regressed the stream of the insistent hours, and on the bank of the mysterious flood peopled with well-loved forms now seen no more and the subtle images of things that were, her witness spirit stood reviewing time. All that she once had hoped and dreamed and been, flew past her eagle, winged through memory's skies. As in a many-hued flaming inner dawn, her life's broad highways and its sweet bypaths lay mapped to her clear recording view, from the bright country of her childhood's days and the blue mountains of her soaring youth and the paradise groves and peacock wings of love to joy clutched under the silent shadow of doom in a last turn where heaven raced with hell. 12 passionate months led in a day of fate. An absolute supernatural darkness falls on man sometimes when he draws near to God. An hour arrives when fail all nature's means, forced out from the protecting ignorance and flung back on his naked primal need, he at length must cast from him his surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within, that had fallen now on Savitri. A point she had reached where life must be in vain or, in her unborn element awake, her will must cancel her body's destiny. For only the unborn spirit's timeless power can lift the yoke imposed by birth in time. Only the self that builds this figure of self can raise the fixed interminable line that joins these changing names, these numberless lives, these new oblivious personalities and keeps still lurking in our conscious acts the trail of old forgotten thoughts and deeds, disown the legacy of our buried selves, the burdensome airship to our vanished forms accepted blindly by the body and soul. An episode in an unremembered tale, its beginning lost, its motive and plot concealed, a once living story has prepared and made our present fate, child of past energies. The fixity of the cosmic sequence is fastened with hidden inevitable links she must disrupt, dislodge by her soul's force her past, a block on the immortal's road, make a raised ground and shape anew her fate. A colloquy of the original gods meeting upon the borders of the unknown, her soul's debate with embodied nothingness must be wrestled out on a dangerous dim background. Her being must confront its formless cause, against the universe weigh its single self. On the bare peak where self is alone with naught and life has no sense and love no place to stand, she must plead her case upon extinction's verge, in the world's death, cave uphold life's helpless claim and acquittance she must win from her past's bond, an old account of suffering exhaust, strike out from time the soul's long compound debt and the heavy servitudes of the karmic gods. The slow revenge of unforgiving law and the deep need of universal pain and hard sacrifice and tragic consequence. Out of a timeless barrier she must break, penetrate with her thinking depths the void's monstrous hush, look into the lonely eyes of immortal death and with her nude spirit measure the infinite's night. The great and dolorous moment now was close. A mailed battalion marching to its doom, the last long days went by with heavy tramp, long but too soon to pass, too near the end. Alone amid the many faces loved, aware among unknowing happy hearts, her armored spirit kept watch upon the hours listening for a foreseen tremendous step in the closed beauty of the inhuman wilds. A combatant in silent dreadful lists, the world unknowing, for the world she stood, no helper had she save the strength within, there was no witness of terrestrial eyes, the gods above and nature soul below were the spectators of that mighty strife. Around her were the austere sky, pointing hills, and the green murmurous broad deep, thoughted woods muttered incessantly their muffled spell. A dense magnificent colored self, wrapped life draped in the leaves' vivid emerald monotone and set with checkered sunbeams and blithe flowers immured her destiny's secluded scene. Had shown to her herself's bare reality and mated her with her environment. Its solitude greatened her human hours with a background of the eternal and unique. A force of spare direct necessity reduced the heavy framework of man's days and his overburdening mass of outward needs to a first thin strip of simple animal wants, and the mighty wildness of the primitive earth and the brooding multitude of patient trees and the musing sapphire leisure of the sky and the solemn weight of the slowly passing months had left in her deep room for thought and God. There was her drama's radiant prologue lived. A spot for the Eternal's tread on earth set in the chloistral yearning of the woods and watched by the aspiration of the peaks appeared through an aureate opening in time, where stillness listening felt the unspoken word and the hours forgot to pass towards grief and change. Here with the suddenness divine advents have, repeating the marvel of the first descent, changing to rapture the dull earthly round, love came to her hiding the shadow, death. Well might he find in her his perfect shrine. Since first the earth being's heavenward growth began, through all the long ordeal of the race, never a rarer creature bore his shaft, that burning test of the Godhead in our parts, a lightning from the heights on our abyss. All in her pointed to a nobler kind. Near to earth's wideness, intimate with heaven, exalted and swift her young large, visioned spirit voyaging through worlds of splendor and of calm overflew the ways of thought to unborn her mind, a sea of white sincerity, passionate in flow, had not one turbid wave. As in a mystic and dynamic dance a priestess of immaculate ecstasies inspired and ruled from truth's revealing vault moves in some prophet cavern of the gods, a heart of silence in the hands of joy inhabited with rich creative beats a body like a parable of dawn that seemed a niche for veiled divinity or golden temple, door to things beyond. Immortal rhythm swayed in her time-born steps, her look, her smile awoke celestial sense even in earth, stuff, and their intense delight poured a supernal beauty on men's lives. A wide self-giving was her native act, a magnanimity as of sea or sky enveloped with its greatness all that came and gave a sense as of a greatened world, her kindly care was a sweet temperate sun, her high passion a blue heaven's equipoise. As might a soul fly like a hunted bird, escaping with tired wings from a world of storms, and a quiet reach like a remembered breast, in a haven of safety and splendid soft repose one could drink life back in streams of honey, fire, recover the lost habit of happiness, feel her bright nature's glorious ambience, and preen joy in her warmth and colors rule. A deep of compassion, a hushed sanctuary, her inward help unbarred a gate in heaven, love in her was wider than the universe, the whole world could take refuge in her single heart. The great unsatisfied Godhead here could dwell, vacant of the dwarf self spiritual that can make all things divine. For even her gulfs were secrecies of light. At once she was the stillness and the word, a continent of self, diffusing peace, an ocean of untrembling virgin fire, the strength, the silence of the gods were hers. In her he found a vastness like his own, his high warm subtle ether he refound and moved in her as in his natural home. In her he met his own eternity. Till then no mournful line had barred this ray. On the frail breast of this precarious earth, since her orbed sight in its breath, fastened house, opening in sympathy with happier stars where life is not exposed to sorrowful change, remembered beauty death, claimed lids ignore and wondered at this world of fragile forms carried on canvas, strips of shimmering time, the impunity of unborn mites was hers. Although she leaned to bear the human load, her walk kept still the measures of the gods. Earth's breath had failed to stain that brilliant glass, unsmeared with the dust of our mortal atmosphere it still reflected heaven's spiritual joy. Almost they saw who lived within her light her playmate in the sempiternal spheres descended from its unattainable realms in her attracting advent's luminous wake, the white, fire dragon, bird of endless bliss drifting with burning wings above her days. Heaven's tranquil shield guarded the mission child. A glowing orbit was her early term, years like gold raiment of the gods that pass, her youth sat throned in calm felicity. But joy cannot endure until the end, there is a darkness in terrestrial things that will not suffer long too glad a note. On her too closed the inescapable hand, the armed immortal bore the snare of time. One dealt with her who meets the burdened great. A signer of the ordeal and the path who chooses in this holocaust of the soul death, fall and sorrow as the spirit's gowards, the dubious Godhead with his torch of pain lit up the chasm of the unfinished world and called her to fill with her vast self the abyss. August and pitiless in his calm outlook, heightening the Eternal's dreadful strategy, he measured the difficulty with the might and dug more deep the gulf that all must cross. Assailing her divinest elements, he made her heart kin to the striving human heart and forced her strength to its appointed road. For this she had accepted mortal breath, to wrestle with the shadow she had come and must confront the riddle of man's birth and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night. Whether to bear with ignorance and death or hew the ways of immortality, to win or lose the godlike game for man, was her soul's issue thrown with destiny's dice. But not to submit and suffer was she born, to lead, to deliver was her glorious part. Here was no fabric of terrestrial make fit for a day's use by busy careless powers. An image fluttering on the screen of fate, half animated for a passing show, or a castaway on the ocean of desire flung to the eddies in a ruthless sport, a chattel and a plaything of time's lords, or one more pawn who comes destined to be pushed one slow move forward on a measureless board in the chess play of the earth, soul with doom, such is the human figure drawn by time. A conscious frame was here, a self-born force. In this enigma of the dusk of God, this slow and strange uneasy compromise of limiting nature with a limitless soul, where all must move between an ordered chance and an uncaring blind necessity, too high the fire spiritual dare not blaze. If once it met the intense original flame, an answering touch might shatter all measures made and earth sink down with the weight of the infinite. A gale is this immense material world, across each road stands armed a stone-eyed law, at every gate the huge dim sentinels pace. A grey tribunal of the ignorance, an inquisition of the priests of night in judgment sit on the adventurer soul, and the dual tables and the karmic norm restrain the titan in us and the god, pain with its lash, joy with its silver bribe guard the wheel's circling immobility. A bond is put on the high, climbing mind, a seal on the too large wide, open heart, death stays the journeying discoverer, life. Thus is the throne of the inconscient safe while the tardy coilings of the eons pass and the animal browses in the sacred fence and the gold hawk can cross the skies no more. But one stood up and lit the limitless flame. To the afflicting penalty of man's hopes, her head she bowed not to the stark decree baring her helpless heart to destiny's stroke. So bows and must the mind born will in man obedient to the statutes fixed of old, admitting without appeal the nether gods. In her the superhuman cast its seed. Inapt to fold its mighty wings of dream her spirit refused to hug the common soil, or, finding all life's golden meanings robbed, compound with earth, struck from the starry list, or quench with black despair the God-given light. Accustomed to the eternal and the true, her being conscious of its divine founts asked not from mortal frailty pain's relief, patched not with failure bargain or compromise. A work she had to do, a word to speak, writing the unfinished story of her soul in thoughts and actions graved in nature's book, she accepted not to close the luminous page, cancel her commerce with eternity, or set a signature of weak assent to the brute balance of the world's exchange. A force in her that toiled since earth was made, accomplishing in life the great world plan, pursuing after death immortal aims, repugn to admit frustration's barren role, forfeit the meaning of her birth in time, obey the government of the casual fact or yield her high destiny up to passing chance. In her own self she found her high recourse, she matched with the iron law her sovereign right, her single will opposed the cosmic rule. To stay the wheels of doom this greatness rose. At the unseen's knock upon her hidden gates her strength made greater by the lightning's touch awoke from slumber in her heart's recess. It bore the stroke of that which kills and saves. Across the awful march no eye can see, barring its dreadful route no will can change, she faced the engines of the universe, a heart stood in the way of the driving wheels, its giant workings paused in front of a mind, its stark conventions met the flame of a soul. A magic leverage suddenly is caught that moves the veiled ineffable's timeless will, a prayer, a master act, a king idea can link man's strength to a transcendent force. Then miracle is made the common rule, one mighty deed can change the course of things, a lonely thought becomes omnipotent. All now seems nature's massed machinery, an endless servitude to material rule and long determination's rigid chain, her firm and changeless habits aping law, her empire of unconscious deft device annul the claim of man's free human will. He too is a machine amid machines, a piston brain pumps out the shapes of thought, a beating heart cuts out emotions' modes, an insentient energy fabricates a soul. Or the figure of the world reveals the signs of a tide chance repeating her old steps in circles around matter's binding posts. A random series of inept events to which reason lends elusive sense, is here, or the empiric life's instinctive search, or a vast ignorant mind's colossal work. But wisdom comes, and vision grows within, a Godhead stands behind the brute machine. This truth broke in a triumph of fire, a victory was won for God in man, the deity revealed its hidden face. The great world, mother now in her arose, a living choice reversed fate's cold dead turn, affirmed the spirit's tread on circumstance, pressed back the senseless die revolving wheel and stopped the mute march of necessity. A flaming warrior from the eternal peaks empowered to force the door denied and closed smote from death's visage its dumb absolute and burst the bounds of consciousness and time. Canto 3. The Yoga of the King, the Yoga of the Soul's Release. A world's desire compelled her mortal birth. One in the front of the immemorial quest, protagonist of the mysterious play in which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours and the blind void struggles to live and see, a thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, brought down to earth's dumb need her radiant power. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight, a colonist from immortality. A pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads, his birth held up a symbol and a sign, his human self like a translucent cloak covered the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. Affiliated to cosmic space and time and paying here God's debt to earth and man a greater sonship was his divine right. Although consenting to mortal ignorance, his knowledge shared the light ineffable. A strength of the original permanence entangled in the moment and its flow, he kept the vision of the vasts behind, a power was in him from the unknowable. An archivist of the symbols of the beyond, a treasurer of superhuman dreams, he bore the stamp of mighty memories and shed their grandiose ray on human life. His days were a long growth to the supreme. A skyward being nourishing its root sun's sustenance from occult spiritual founts climbed through white rays to meet an unseen Sunday. His soul lived as eternity's delegate, his mind was like a fire assailing heaven, his will a hunter in the trails of light. An ocean impulse lifted every breath, each action left the footprints of a god, each moment was a beat of puissant wings. The little plot of our mortality touched by this tenant from the heights became a playground of the living infinite. This bodily appearance is not all, the form deceives, the person is a mask, hid deep in man's celestial powers can dwell. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years an incognito of the imperishable. A spirit that is a flame of God abides, a fiery portion of the wonderful, artist of his own beauty and delight, immortal in our mortal poverty. This sculptor of the forms of the infinite, this screened unrecognized inhabitant, initiate of his own veiled mysteries, hides in a small dumb seed his cosmic thought. In the mute strength of the occult idea determining predestined shape and act, passenger from life to life, from scale to scale, changing his imaged self from form to form, he regards the icon growing by his gaze and in the worm foresees the coming God. At last the traveler in the paths of time arrives on the frontiers of eternity. In the transient symbol of humanity draped, he feels his substance of undying self and loses his kinship to mortality. A beam of the eternal smites his heart, his thought stretches into infinitude, all in him turns to spirit vastnesses. His soul breaks out to join the oversoul, his life is oceaned by that super life. He has drunk from the breasts of the mother of the worlds, a topless supernature fills his frame. She adopts his spirit's everlasting ground as the security of her changing world and shapes the figure of her unborn mites. Immortally she conceives herself in him, in the creature the unveiled creatrix works. Her face is seen through his face, her eyes through his eyes, her being is his through a vast identity. Then is revealed in man the overt divine. A static oneness and dynamic power descend in him, the integral Godhead seals, his soul and body take that splendid stamp. A long dim preparation is man's life, a circle of toil and hope and war and peace tracked out by life on matter's obscure ground. In his climb to a peak no feet have ever trod, he seeks through a penumbra shot with flame a veiled reality half known, ever missed, a search for something or someone never found, cult of an ideal never made real here, an endless spiral of ascent and fall until at last is reached the giant point through which his glory shines for whom we were made and we break into the infinity of God. Across our nature's border line we escape into supernature's arc of living light. This now was witnessed in that son of force, in him that high to turn this frail mud engine to heaven use. A presence wrought behind the ambiguous screen, it beat his soil to bear a titan's weight, refining half-hewn blocks of natural strength it built his soul into a statued God. The craftsman of the magic stuff of self who labors at his high and difficult plan in the wide workshop of the wonderful world, modeled in inward time his rhythmic parts. Then came the abrupt transcendent miracle, the masked immaculate grandeur could outline, at travail in the occult womb of life, his dreamed magnificence of things to be. A crown of the architecture of the worlds, a mystery of married earth and heaven annexed divinity to the mortal scheme. A seer was born, a shining guest of time. For him mind's limiting firmament ceased above. In the griffin forefront of the night and day a gap was rent in the all-concealing vault, the conscious ends of being went rolling back, the landmarks of the little person fell, the island ego joined its continent. Overpast was this world of rigid limiting forms, life's barriers opened into the unknown. Abolished were conception's covenants and, striking off subjection's rigorous clause, annulled the soul's treaty with nature's nescience. All the grey inhibitions were torn off and broken the intellect's hard and lustrous lid, truth unpartitioned found immense sky room, an empyrean vision saw anew, the bounded mind became a boundless light, the finite self-mated wisdom upraised him to her master craft and made him an archmason of the soul, a builder of the immortal secret house, an aspirant to supernal timelessness, freedom and empire called to him from on high, above mind's twilight and life's star, led night there. Gleamed the dawn of a spiritual day. As so he grew into his larger self, humanity framed his movements less and less, a greater being saw a greater world. A fearless will for knowledge dared to erase the lines of safety reason draws that bar mind saw, souls dive into the infinite. Even his first steps broke our small earth bounds and loitered in a vaster freer air. In hands sustained by a transfiguring might he caught up lightly like a giant's bow left slumbering in a sealed and secret cave the powers that sleep unused in man within. He made of miracle a normal act and turned to a common part of divine works, magnificently natural at this height, efforts that would shatter the strength of mortal hearts, pursued in a royalty of mighty ease aims too sublime for nature's daily will, the gifts of the spirit crowding came to him, they were his life's pattern and his privilege. A pure perception lent its lucent joy, its intimate vision waited not to think, it enveloped all nature in a single glance, it looked into the very self of things, deceived no more by form he saw the soul. In beings it knew what lurked to them unknown, it seized the idea in mind, the wish in the heart, it plucked out from grey folds of secrecy the motives which from their own sight men hide. He felt the beating life in other men invade him with their happiness and their grief, their love, their anger, their unspoken hopes entered in currents or in pouring waves into the immobile ocean of his calm. He heard the inspired sound of his own thoughts re-echoed in the vault of other minds, the world's thought streams travelled into his ken, his inner self grew near to others' selves and bore a kinship's weight, a common tie, yet stood untouched, king of itself, alone. A magical accord quickened and attuned to ethereal symphonies the old earthy strings. It raised the servitors of mind and life to be happy partners in the soul's response. Tissue and nerve were turned to sensitive chords, records of luster and ecstasy. It made the body's means the spirit's acolytes. A heavenlier function with a finer mode lit with its grace man's outward earthliness, the soul's experience of its deeper sheaths no more slept drugged by matter's dominance. In the dead wall closing us from wider self, into a secrecy of apparent sleep, the mystic tracked beyond our waking thoughts, a door parted, built in by matter's force, releasing things unseized by earthly sense, a world unseen, unknown by outward mind appeared in the silent spaces of the soul. He sat in secret chambers looking out into the luminous countries of the unborn where all things dreamed by the mind are seen and true and all that the life longs for is drawn close. He saw the perfect in their starry homes wearing the glory of a deathless form, lain in the arms of the Eternal's peace, wrapped in the heart, beats of God, ecstasy. He lived in the mystic space where thought is born and will is nursed by an ethereal power and fed on the white milk of the Eternal's strengths till it grows into the likeness of a god. In the witnesses' occult rooms with mind-built walls on hidden interiors, lurking passages opened the windows of the inner sight. He owned the house of undivided time. Lifting the heavy curtain of the flesh he stood upon a threshold serpent, watched, and peered into gleaming endless corridors, silent and listening in the silent heart for the coming of the new and the unknown. He gazed across the empty stillnesses and heard the footsteps of the undreamed idea in the far avenues of the beyond. He heard the secret voice, the word that knows, and saw the secret face that is our own. The inner planes uncovered their crystal doors, strange powers and influences touched his life. A vision came of higher realms than ours, a consciousness of brighter fields and skies, of beings less circumscribed than brief-lived men and subtler bodies than these passing frames, objects too fine for our material grasp, acts vibrant with a superhuman light and movements pushed by a superconscient force, and joys that never flowed through mortal limbs, and lovelier scenes than earth's and happier lives. A consciousness of beauty and of bliss, a knowledge which became what it perceived, replaced the separated sense and heart air glowed and teemed with marvelous shapes and hues, in the nostrils quivered celestial fragrances, on the tongue lingered the honey of paradise. A channel of universal harmony, hearing was a stream of magic audience, a bed for occult sounds earth cannot hear. Out of a covert tract of slumber self the voice came of a truth submerged, unknown that flows beneath the cosmic surfaces, only mid an omniscient silence heard, held by intuitive heart and secret sense. It caught the burden of secrecies sealed and dumb, it voiced the unfulfilled demand of earth and the song of promise of unrealized heavens and all that hides in an omnipotent sleep. In the unceasing drama carried by time on its long listening flood that bears the world's insoluble doubt on a pilgrimage without goal, a laughter of sleepless pleasure foamed and spumed and murmurings of desire that cannot die, a cry came of the world's delight to be, the grandeur and greatness of its will to live, recall of the soul's adventure into space, a traveler through the magic centuries and being's labor in matter's universe, its search for the mystic meaning of its birth and joy of high spiritual response, its throb of satisfaction and content in all the sweetness of the gifts of life, its large breath and pulse and thrill of hope and fear, its taste of pangs and tears and ecstasy, its rapture's poignant beat of sudden bliss, the sob of its passion of all that suffers to be still unknown and all that labors vainly to be born and all the sweetness none will ever taste and all the beauty that will never be. Inaudible to our deaf mortal ears the wide world, rhythms wove their stupendous chant to which life strives to fit our rhyme, beats here, melting our limits in the illimitable, tuning the finite to infinity. A low muttering rose from the subconscient caves, the stammer of the primal ignorance, answer to that inarticulate questioning, there stooped with lightning neck and thunder's wings a radiant hymn to the inexpressible and the anthem of the superconscient light. All was revealed there none can here express, vision and dream were fables spoken by truth or symbols more veridical than fact, or were truths enforced by supernatural seals. Immortal eyes approached and looked in his, and beings of many kingdoms neared and spoke, The ever-living whom we name as dead could leave their glory beyond death and birth to utter the wisdom which exceeds all phrase, the kings of evil and the kings of good, appellants at the reason's judgment seat, proclaimed the gospel of their opposites, and all believed themselves spokesmen of God. The gods of light and titans of the dark battled for his soul as for a costly prize. In every hour loosed from the quiver of time there rose a song of new discovery, a bow twang's hum of young experiment. Each day was a spiritual romance, as if he was born into a bright new world. Adventure leaped and danger brought a keen sweet tang of joy. Each happening was a deep experience. There were high encounters, epic colloquies, and counsels came couched in celestial speech, and honeyed pleadings breathed from occult lips to help the heart to yield to rapture's call, and sweet temptations stole from beauty's realms and sudden ecstasies from a world of bliss. It was a region of wonder and delight. All now his bright clairaudience could receive, a contact thrilled of mighty unknown things. Awakened to new unearthly closenesses, the touch replied to subtle infinities, and with a silver cry of opening gates sight's lightnings leaped into the invisible. Ever his consciousness and vision grew, they took an ampler sweep, a loftier flight, he passed the border marked for matter's rule and passed the zone where thought replaces life. Out of this world of signs suddenly he came into a silent self where world was not and looked beyond into a nameless vast. These symbol figures lost their right to live, all tokens dropped our sense can recognize, there the heart beat no more at body's touch, there the eyes gazed no more on beauty's shape. In rare and lucent intervals of hush into a signless region he could soar packed with the deep contents of formlessness where world was into a single being wrapped and all was known by the light of identity and spirit was its own self-evidence. The Supreme's gaze looked out through human eyes and saw all things and creatures as itself and knew all thought and word as its own voice. Their unity is two and love is a yearning of the one for the one, and beauty is a sweet difference of the same and oneness is the soul of multitude. There all the truths unite in a single truth, and all ideas rejoin reality. There knowing herself by her own termless self, wisdom supernal, wordless, absolute sat uncompanioned in the eternal calm, all seeing, motionless, sovereign and alone. Their knowledge needs not words to embody idea, seeking a house in boundlessness, weary of its homeless immortality, asks not in thought's carved brilliant cell to rest whose single window's clipped outlook on things sees only a little arc of God's vast sky. The boundless with the boundless their consorts, while there, one can be wider than the world, while there, one is one's own infinity. His center was no more in earthly mind, a power of seeing silence filled his limbs, caught by a voiceless white epiphany into a vision that surpasses forms, into a living that surpasses life, he neared the still consciousness sustaining all. The voice that only by speech can move the mind became a silent knowledge in the soul, the strength that only in action feels its truth was lodged now in a mute omnipotent peace. A leisure in the labor of the worlds, a pause in the joy and anguish of the search restored the stress of nature to God's calm. A vast unanimity ended life's debate. The war of thoughts that fathers the universe, the clash of forces struggling to prevail in the tremendous shock that lights a star as in the building of earth grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space plowed by the seeking of the world's desire, the long regurgitations of time's flood, the torment edging the dire force of lust that wakes kinetic in earth's dullard slime and carves a personality out of mud, the sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed, the estrus which creates with fire of pain, the fate that punishes virtue with defeat, the tragedy that destroys long happiness, the weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, ceased in a truth which lives in its own light. His soul stood free, a witness and a king. Absorbed no more in the moment, ridden flux where mind incessantly drifts as on a raft hurried from phenomenon to phenomenon, he abode at rest in indivisible time. As if a story long written but acted now, in his present he held his future and his past, felt in the seconds the uncounted years and saw the hours like dots upon a page. An aspect of the unknown reality altered the meaning of the cosmic scene. This huge material universe became a small result of a stupendous force, overtaking the moment the eternal ray illumined that which never yet was made. Thought lay down in a mighty voicelessness, the toiling thinker widened and grew still, wisdom transcendent touched his quivering heart, his soul could sail beyond thought's luminous bar, mind screened no more the shoreless infinite. Across a void retreating sky he glimpsed through a last glimmer and drift of vanishing stars the superconscient realms of motionless peace where judgment ceases and the word is mute and the unconceived lies pathless and alone. There came not form or any mounting voice, there only were silence and the absolute. Out of that stillness mind new born arose and woke to truths once inexpressible, and forms appeared, dumbly significant, a seeing thought, a self-revealing voice. He knew the source from which his spirit came, movement was married to the immobile vast, he plunged his roots into the infinite, he based his life upon eternity. Only a while at first these heavenly estates, these large wide, poised upliftings could endure. The high and luminous tension breaks too soon, the body's stone stillness and the life's hushed trance, the breathless might and calm of silent mind, or slowly they fail as sets a golden day. The restless nether members tire of peace, a nostalgia of old little works and joys, a need to call back small familiar selves, to tread the accustomed and inferior way, the need to rest in a natural pose of fall, as a child who learns to walk can walk not long, replace the Titan wall forever to climb, on the heart's altar dim the sacred fire. An old pull of subconscious chords renews, it draws the unwilling spirit from the heights, or a dull gravitation drags us down to the blind-driven inertia of our base. This too the supreme diplomat can use, he makes our fall a means for greater rise. For into ignorant nature's gusty field, into the half-ordered chaos of mortal life the formless power, the self of eternal light follow in the shadow of the spirit's descent, the twin duality forever one chooses its home mid the tumults of the sense. He comes unseen into our darker parts and, curtained by the darkness, does his work, a subtle and all-knowing guest and guide, till they too feel the need and will to change. All here must learn to obey a higher law, our body's cells must hold the immortal's flame. Else would the spirit reach alone its source leaving a half-saved world to its dubious fate. Nature would ever labor unredeemed, our earth would ever spin unhelped in space, and this immense creation's purpose failed till at last the frustrate universe sank undone. Even his godlike strength to rise must fall, his greater consciousness withdrew behind, dim and eclipsed, his human outside strove to feel again the old sublimities, bring the high saving touch, the ethereal flame, call back to its dire need the divine force. Always the power poured back like sudden rain, or slowly in his breast a presence grew.